What if the richest man in Vermont, whose biotech empire stretched from Boston to New York, found himself powerless before a little girl sitting in the snow, selling paper bracelets outside a hospital gate? If stories of healing, redemption, and second chances touch your heart, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. The wind sliced through Burlington that evening like shards of glass, each gust carrying needles of snow that stung exposed skin. Ethan Hale adjusted the collar of his tailored wool coat as he stepped through the revolving doors of the University of Vermont Medical Center. The fluorescent light inside faded behind him, replaced by the dim, blue-gray haze of twilight. He had just concluded a meeting with the hospital's cardiology board, an obligatory gathering, one of many, filled with clipped medical jargon and sterile slides of ejection fractions, mortality rates, and grant budgets. Numbers had once excited him. Numbers had built Hale Biotech, the company that placed him on the cover of Forbes. But lately, they had become meaningless abstractions, figures climbing and falling while his heart remained frozen in place. Snowflakes settled on his graying hair. He ignored them, distracted by the vibration of his phone in his hand. Another email, another proposal, another voice clamoring for his attention. He almost missed her. Almost. On the stone steps just outside the hospital gate, where the snow gathered in uneven drifts, sat a little girl. She looked no more than 8, her coat 2 sizes too big, the sleeves frayed, the zipper broken. She had wrapped a scarf around her neck twice, but it was too thin to fight off the sharp Vermont wind. Her breath formed fragile clouds that dissolved into the air as quickly as they appeared. In her lap was a small cardboard box filled with something strange, tiny bracelets made of folded paper, fragile loops threaded together with string. Her fingers, reddened and cracked from the cold, moved quickly as she arranged them in neat rows, as if she were guarding treasures in a shop window. Ethan slowed, his polished shoes crunching against the thin crust of snow. Something about the scene tugged at him. He should have kept walking, chauffeur waiting, meeting in Manhattan tomorrow, emails piling higher than the snowbanks. Instead, his eyes locked with hers. The girl looked up. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes luminous, defiant against the winter. She smiled, an unexpected brightness in the bleakness of the evening. "Would you like to buy a smile, sir?" she asked, her voice small yet steady. She lifted one of the bracelets, holding it as though it were a priceless jewel. Ethan froze. The word struck him harder than the wind. Buy a smile? He had bought companies, patents, entire divisions of research facilities, but he had never been asked if he wanted to buy a smile. His throat tightened. He adjusted his gloves, trying to mask the sudden unease. "No, thank you," he murmured, forcing formality into his tone. "You should go inside before you catch pneumonia." But she only tilted her head, that fragile bracelet still offered between her fingers. "If you walk past, sir, you'll miss your chance. Smiles don't wait forever." Ethan turned away too quickly, almost stumbling on the icy step. He needed to get to the car, to the warmth, to the silence. But as he walked, the girl's words clung to him like burrs to wool. Smiles don't wait forever. He reached the sleek black sedan idling by the curb. The driver opened the door, but Ethan hesitated. Through the falling snow, he could still see her. Small, fragile, persistent against the cold. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was offering something, even as the wind bit into her skin. Inside the car, heat blasted against his face. He pressed his phone to his palm, scrolling mindlessly. Yet every few seconds his mind betrayed him, returning to the image. The red cheeks, the paper bracelet, the impossible question. "Would you like to buy a smile?" The sedan pulled away, tires grinding against the salted pavement. Ethan exhaled, trying to shake off the discomfort. But it didn't leave. It rooted itself inside, like the first crack in a sheet of ice stretching across a lake. He knew, with unsettling clarity, that the image of that girl would follow him long after the snow melted. For years, Ethan Hale had trained himself to keep his heart sealed, to let no vulnerability seep through. Loss had taught him that lesson well. But tonight, beneath the soft fall of snow on a cold Vermont evening, a little girl with paper bracelets had planted something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a fracture, a beginning. The hospital corridors always smelled faintly of antiseptic and weariness. Ethan Hale walked them like a man on autopilot, his shoes echoing against the polished linoleum floors. He had come back to the University of Vermont Medical Center the very next day, not because he needed to, but because he couldn't sleep. The girl's words from the night before had burrowed into his mind. "Would you like to buy a smile, sir?" He tried to dismiss it as a passing encounter. Yet here he was, standing under the cold fluorescent glow of the pediatric cardiology wing, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, wondering why a CEO with global meetings waiting in New York had returned to a small hospital in Burlington. The sliding glass doors hissed as they opened. A woman in a white coat approached, her stride brisk but not hurried, her eyes alert behind her glasses. She was in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back into a loose bun, a stethoscope slung casually around her neck. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, her voice warm, professional. "Yes," Ethan said, straightening. "I'm Dr. Emily Sanders," she introduced herself. "Pediatric cardiology. Thank you for agreeing to meet." He offered a polite nod. He didn't remember agreeing, but then again, the hospital administration had a way of setting things up for him. Perhaps his reputation as Vermont's most powerful benefactor had forced the matter. Dr. Sanders gestured toward a row of chairs along the hallway. "We have a patient I wanted you to see. A special case. Funding is complicated." Ethan frowned. "I'm not here to write blank checks." Her lips curved in a knowing half-smile. "Then perhaps you'll consider hearing her story." Before he could respond, she turned and began walking. He followed, compelled more by her confidence than by any real decision of his own. They passed parents slumped in chairs, IV poles standing like silent sentinels, and children wheeled in wagons instead of wheelchairs, blankets wrapped tight around them. At the end of the hall, Dr. Sanders stopped before a door. She pushed it open, stepping aside to let Ethan in first. The room was small, painted in cheerful colors that couldn't disguise the medical equipment crowding its corners. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms. A stuffed animal sat perched on a bedside table beside a plastic cup of crayons. And in the middle of the room, propped up by pillows, was her, the little girl from the snow. Ethan's breath caught. She wasn't bundled in the oversized coat now. She wore a pale hospital gown that dwarfed her small frame. Electrodes dotted her chest, wires trailing to the monitor above. Yet her face, pale but luminous, lit up the moment she saw him. "You came back," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She lifted one of the paper bracelets from the bedside tray and held it out toward him. "I told you you're not allowed to walk past me twice." Ethan froze in the doorway. He had faced down competitors in boardrooms, argued with senators over policy, stared down investors worth billions. None of it had made him feel so utterly disarmed as he did now, confronted by the fragile smile of this child. Dr. Sanders watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. Then she said softly, "This is Lila." The girl tilted her head, curls brushing her cheeks. "You didn't tell me your name yesterday." He cleared his throat. "Ethan." Ethan, she repeated, rolling the name like a pebble in her palm. Then she slipped the bracelet over his wrist. The paper crinkled, fragile against his tailored cuff. Dr. Sanders moved to the foot of the bed, flipping open a chart. Lila has a severe form of dilated cardiomyopathy. Her heart's enlarged, pumping function less than 30%. She's been in and out of the hospital for years. Ethan glanced at the monitor, its rhythmic peaks and valleys. Numbers scrolled across the screen, but he didn't need a degree to understand the gravity. She needs advanced intervention, Emily continued, her voice clinical yet heavy with the weight of reality. Possibly a transplant, but there are wait lists, insurance denials, and clinical trial restrictions. We're fighting on every front. Lila, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignoring the medical jargon, tapped the side of the bed. Want to sit, Ethan? He hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. His knees bent awkwardly, as though the chair were too small for someone like him. He had never felt so out of place, yet so unwilling to leave. Lila studied him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. You look like you don't know how to smile. That's okay. I can teach you. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Teach me? She nodded seriously. Step 1. Stop thinking about numbers. Step 2. Look at me. Step 3. Try to feel the snow on your face, not just see it fall. He stared at her, uncertain whether to laugh or to cry. Dr. Sanders, still at the foot of the bed, offered a faint smile. She has that effect on people. Silence stretched, broken only by the steady beeping of the monitor. Ethan shifted in his chair, his gaze drawn to the tray of paper bracelets beside her. Dozens of them, folded with tiny, meticulous fingers. Why bracelets? He asked finally. Because they don't break, Lila said matter-of-factly. Even if the paper gets wet, I can make another. It's like a promise you can wear. She looked at the one now circling his wrist. Now you have a promise too. Ethan swallowed. The bracelet was nothing, just a loop of folded paper. Yet it weighed heavier than the platinum watch on his other wrist. Dr. Sanders closed the chart softly. Mr. Hale, I know you're a busy man, but this little girl, she needs more than what the system can give her. She needs someone to fight for her, to see her, not just her numbers. Ethan stood abruptly, almost knocking over the chair. His instinct was to retreat, to armor himself again in distance and duty. But when he looked back at Lila, still smiling despite the wires and machines tethering her, he felt the ice in his chest shift. I'll think about it, he muttered. Lila only laughed, a sound too bright, too fragile for the sterile room. Thinking is step 1. Smiling is step 2. As Ethan left the room, the bracelet scratched lightly against his skin. It felt less like decoration and more like a chain, pulling him back. The room hummed with the quiet machinery of survival. The ECG monitor pulsed steadily, its peaks and valleys a fragile reminder that every beat was borrowed. Ethan Hale sat uneasily in the chair beside the hospital bed, his tall frame dwarfed by the child-sized furniture. He should have been in Manhattan this morning, commanding a boardroom, dictating numbers that shaped markets. Instead, he found himself staring at a tray of crayons, half-colored pages, and a little girl with a mischievous smile. Lila adjusted the tray table across her lap, scattering the pile of paper bracelets she had been folding. Do you know how to play tic-tac-toe? She asked, eyes twinkling. Ethan blinked. Tic-tac-toe? Yeah, she said, already grabbing a piece of lined notebook paper and drawing a quick grid. It's easy. You can be X. I'll be O. Unless you're afraid to lose. The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had challenged him so directly, let alone a child tethered to machines. I don't lose, he said softly. That's what they all say, Lila replied, grinning as she handed him the pen. He hesitated, then leaned forward, placing his first X in the top left corner. Lila responded immediately, an O in the center, her tiny fingers steady despite the IV taped to her hand. The game unfolded quickly, X, O, until Lila leaned back, triumphant. 3 in a row, you lost. Ethan stared at the paper, stunned by the simplicity of his defeat. Lila giggled, her laughter bubbling up like a melody against the mechanical beeps. Don't worry. Grown-ups always think too much, that's why they lose. Something inside him softened. He had faced mergers worth billions, legal battles that spanned years. Yet here in this small room in Vermont, he had been outmaneuvered in less than a minute by a girl who folded paper promises. You're clever, he murmured. I'm alive, Lila corrected, her tone both matter-of-fact and profound. She tapped the ECG monitor with one finger. For now. Ethan's gaze followed hers. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Heart rate irregular, oxygen saturation dipping just below normal. A green line marked her ejection fraction, under 30%. He didn't need a medical degree to know what that meant. Dr. Emily Sanders had explained it yesterday, how Lila's heart, enlarged and weak, pumped like a tired machine. Less than 30% efficiency. Every beat was a gamble. Lila must have read the shadow crossing his face because she added softly, Don't look so scared, Ethan. I've been playing against time for years. I'm just glad I still get to play. The words lodged in his chest. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to reassure her or let the truth hang between them. What if... He stopped himself, the unfinished sentence too heavy. What if I don't have many more games left? Lila finished for him, her voice steady. That's why you shouldn't waste turns. She pushed the pen back toward him. Rematch? They played again and again. Each time Ethan lost, sometimes quickly, sometimes after a near draw. Lila seemed to take particular delight in watching his brow furrow as he tried to anticipate her moves. You think like a businessman, she teased. All strategy, no fun. And you? He asked. I think like someone who knows tomorrow might not come, she answered simply. So I play for today. The room fell quiet. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted lazily against the glass, tiny sparks of light in the gray Vermont sky. Ethan found himself staring at them, remembering another snowfall years ago, one that had ended in tragedy. His daughter's laughter had vanished into the blizzard that night, leaving silence in its place. He forced the memory back down, but the crack in his armor widened. Lila leaned closer, whispering conspiratorially. Want to know a secret? What? He asked. I'm not afraid of losing. I'm afraid of not playing enough games before I have to stop. The pen trembled in Ethan's hand. He had spent years insulating himself from pain, convincing himself that detachment was strength. Yet here was a child facing mortality with more courage than he had ever mustered. The ECG monitor beeped irregularly, a warning tone slicing the moment. Dr. Sanders entered briskly, her eyes scanning the numbers. PVCs, she murmured. We'll adjust her meds. She glanced at Ethan, lowering her voice. Ventricular arrhythmias. It's unstable. Lila waved her hand impatiently. Don't talk like I'm not here, Dr. Emily. I know what PVCs are. They just mean my heart likes to dance funny. She grinned at Ethan. See? Even my heart doesn't like to play fair. Emily shook her head with a faint smile, then adjusted the IV drip. Ethan sat rigid, every instinct in him screaming to intervene, to fix, to control. But this was a battle fought not in boardrooms or courtrooms. It was fought beat by fragile beat, move by move on a paper grid. When Emily left, silence settled again, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the machines. Lila placed another O on the paper, tilting her head. Your turn. Ethan placed his X slowly, realizing he didn't care whether he won. He cared only that she kept playing. Why do you like tic-tac-toe so much? He asked quietly. Because it's simple, she replied. You don't need much. Just paper, a pen, and someone willing to play. And even if you lose, you can always start a new game. Her words struck him deeper than any corporate lecture. He thought of his life, skyscrapers, contracts, power plays. Yet here, in this tiny room, a girl with a failing heart was teaching him the essence of hope. She leaned back, studying him with those luminous eyes. Ethan, are you afraid to lose? He hesitated, then admitted, Yes. Lila smiled gently. That's okay. I'm afraid too. But I'm more afraid of not having enough time to win once in a while. The paper bracelet on his wrist crinkled as he clenched his fist. For the first time in years, Ethan Hale felt something thaw inside, the beginning of a fight not for markets, but for one fragile heartbeat. The snow fell heavier that week, draping Burlington in a quiet white stillness. From the window of her hospital room, Lila pressed her forehead to the cold glass and watched children bundled in coats dragging sleds across the hill near the parking lot. Their laughter rose faintly, muffled by distance and glass, but enough to ignite something in her chest that no medication could reach. Ethan Hale entered quietly, carrying a folder under one arm. He had told himself he was here only for updates from Dr. Sanders, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't stay away. The bracelet of folded paper still circled his wrist, the edges frayed, yet he hadn't taken it off. Lila turned as he approached. Her smile was smaller today, tinged with a weariness that betrayed the strain of her failing heart. They look so free out there, she murmured, nodding toward the window. Ethan followed her gaze. Snowflakes swirled in the winter air as children rolled down the hill, leaving trails like brushstrokes on a blank canvas. He cleared his throat. You'll be out there too one day. She shook her head, curls brushing her cheeks. Not like that. I can't run. Sometimes I can't even walk without the monitor yelling at me. She tapped the machine beside her bed, which responded with a soft, accusing beep. Silence stretched between them. Then she whispered, almost as if confessing a secret, My dream is to go to a real park, not just look at it from the window, to sit on a swing, to feel snowflakes on my face, to chase them until I fall down laughing. Her voice cracked with longing. Just once. Ethan's chest tightened. A park. Something so ordinary yet impossibly out of reach for her. He had the resources to buy islands, skyscrapers, entire biotech labs, but he couldn't buy her a working heart, not instantly. Still, he could not ignore that dream. That evening, while the hospital wing settled into its routine hush, Ethan made a call. His tone was clipped, decisive, the way it was when he built empires. We'll need heaters, artificial snow machines, a swing set. Yes, on the roof. Overnight. Make it safe, discreet. I don't care what it costs. By dawn, the rooftop of UVM Medical Center had been transformed. Beneath a canopy of strings lights, a small evergreen tree stood decorated with paper ornaments. A swing hung from a sturdy frame. Heaters blew warm air against the bitter cold, while snow machines whispered flakes that glittered in the artificial glow. It wasn't Central Park, but it was magic carved from steel and determination. Dr. Sanders raised her eyebrows when Ethan insisted on moving Lila. This is highly irregular, she warned. Irregular saves lives, he countered. With careful monitoring, Nurses wheeled Lila to the rooftop. The cold struck her cheeks instantly, but she gasped not from the chill, but from wonder. It's a winter garden, she cried, her voice echoing against the rooftop walls. Her fingers, still attached to IV lines, reached for the swing. Ethan steadied her gently as she sat. For a brief moment, she looked like any other child, her laughter ringing as he pushed her slowly back and forth, snowflakes clinging to her hair. "You did this?" she asked breathlessly. Ethan nodded. "You're not as scary as you look," she teased, her grin widening. For a few blissful minutes, she was free. She kicked her legs, catching snow on her tongue, clutching the swing chains as if she were flying. Ethan stood nearby, his chest aching with a mixture of joy and dread. Then it happened. Her laughter cut off suddenly, replaced by a ragged gasp. The swing slowed. Her small hand clutched her chest, the monitor attached to her wrist shrieking in alarm. Numbers plummeted, oxygen saturation dropping fast. "SpO2 is 72, a nurse shouted. Dr. Sanders rushed forward. "We need to get her back inside, now!" Ethan's heart lurched. He scooped Lila into his arms instinctively, her frail body frighteningly light against his chest. Her lips had turned pale, her breaths shallow and desperate. "Hold on, Lila," he whispered, his voice breaking as he carried her back down the stairwell. "Hold on." Back in the room, chaos erupted. Nurses connected oxygen. Dr. Sanders barked orders. "Increase flow to 10 liters. Prepare for nebulization. Check her ABG immediately." Ethan stood frozen in the corner, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. The machines beeped frantically, each alarm like a hammer blow. He had faced financial collapses, public scandals, betrayals by men he once trusted. None of it had made him feel this helpless. Lila's eyes fluttered, half closed. She looked toward him, lips trembling, and whispered, "Don't stop the snow." Then the oxygen mask descended, and her voice was lost in the rush of machines. Minutes felt like hours, but gradually, the numbers began to climb. SpO2 rose, 75, 82, 90. The alarms quieted, replaced by the steady rhythm of the ECG. Dr. Sanders exhaled sharply, removing her gloves. "She's stable, for now." She turned to Ethan, her expression stern. "That was reckless. Her heart can't handle exertion like that. You nearly lost her." Ethan's throat closed. He had built empires on risk, but never had a gamble felt so devastating. He glanced at Lila, now sleeping under the oxygen mask, her face fragile yet peaceful. "I just wanted her to feel alive," he said hoarsely. Dr. Sanders softened, though her eyes still carried warning. "Then help us keep her alive. Don't push her over the edge." Ethan remained by the bedside long after the staff left. The winter garden on the rooftop, still glowing above, felt like both a triumph and a near tragedy. He sat down, his hand hovering near Lila's small one. Her hidden dream had nearly cost her life. And yet he knew with aching certainty it had also given her a reason to keep fighting. For the first time, Ethan understood the fragile line between hope and despair, and how far he was willing to go to keep her on the side of hope. The following week, snowstorms rolled across Vermont, paralyzing traffic but failing to keep Ethan Hale from his office in downtown Burlington. From the glass walls of the Hale Biotech headquarters, the view stretched across Lake Champlain, frozen and silent under a white horizon. Ethan stood at the head of the conference table, the skyline behind him. His reflection fractured across the surface of the windows. Around the table sat the company's board of directors, seasoned investors, legal advisors, and executives who had built their fortunes alongside him. They shuffled papers, adjusted ties, and tapped pens, the language of power muted but unmistakable. We have an opportunity, Ethan began, his voice clipped and controlled. Lila Matthews, 8 years old, dilated cardiomyopathy, ejection fraction under 30%. Standard therapies are failing. I propose we use our bioengineered heart patch on her. The room froze. A few eyebrows lifted. One director leaned back in his leather chair with a skeptical sigh. Ethan, said Charles Whitford, the CFO, with respect, the cardiac patch is still in phase 2. The FDA has not cleared human use outside of trial criteria. You know the IRB would never approve compassionate use without months of protocol review. Another voice, colder. It's too risky. If she dies under our intervention, the fallout would be catastrophic. The press would crucify us. Investors would revolt. Hale Biotech could lose everything. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but hearing their words aloud, clinical, detached, made his chest burn. So we wait? His voice grew sharper. We let an 8-year-old girl suffocate in a hospital bed because the paperwork isn't stamped? The general counsel adjusted her glasses. Regulatory barriers exist for a reason. Compassionate use requires IRB approval, informed consent, and data submission. We cannot circumvent protocol without jeopardizing every trial under our umbrella. Ethan slammed his hand against the polished table. We are sitting on technology that could save her life. You think I built this company to watch children die while lawyers shuffle forms? A heavy silence followed. Snow drifted against the windows, muffling the world outside. Ethan's breathing was ragged. His fist clenched so tightly the paper bracelet around his wrist creased and bent. Ethan, Charles said more gently, you're too close to this. We all know what you lost years ago. But personal grief cannot dictate corporate strategy. The words cut like glass. For a moment, Ethan's composure cracked. An image of his daughter's face in the snowstorm years ago flashing like a blade in his mind. He steadied himself, voice low but searing. You dare reduce her to my grief? This is not about me. This is about whether we use what we've built to save a child. If we can save one, we can save thousands. One of the directors leaned forward, folding his hands. If you push this through and it fails, Hale Biotech becomes synonymous with reckless science. You will destroy the legacy you've spent decades building. Ethan's gaze swept the room, catching each pair of eyes that refused to meet his. Then he spoke, each word deliberate. Legacies mean nothing if they are built on graves. No one answered. The only sound was the steady hum of the heating system fighting the storm outside. Finally, Charles sighed. If you proceed, you'll have to do it outside Hale Biotech, without board approval, without corporate protection. Ethan straightened, his decision already made. Then so be it. He gathered his papers, his movements controlled but burning with fury. At the door he paused and turned back. We wait for FDA approval, we wait for regulatory clearance, we wait for trial phases, but children do not wait. They die. I will not stand by while this company hides behind fear. If you lack courage, then step aside. I'll fund it myself. He left the boardroom in silence, the echo of his footsteps trailing behind like a challenge. Back at the hospital that evening, the contrast was almost unbearable. Gone were the polished floors and sterile arguments. Instead, Ethan found himself seated once more beside Lila's bed. She was pale, weaker than before, but her eyes brightened when she saw him. Did you win today? She asked softly. Ethan hesitated. Not exactly. She tilted her head, studying him. You look like you lost another game. He almost laughed at her accuracy. Maybe, but this isn't a game I intend to lose. Lila reached for the bracelet on his wrist, tracing the folds with her tiny fingers. Sometimes you have to play even if the rules aren't fair. Otherwise, the other side always wins. Her words, innocent yet piercing, struck him harder than the board's objections. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I'm going to fight for you, Lila. Whatever it takes. Her smile was faint but luminous. Good, because I still want my park. Ethan sat back, watching her drift into sleep, the monitor beeping steadily at her side. The weight of the day pressed against him, but beneath it was something fiercer than despair. Resolve. He would risk reputation, fortune, even the company he built. Because sometimes the heart must outrun the boardroom. And this time, he intended to win. The hospital at night was its own world, a hushed universe of dimmed hall lights, whispered instructions, and the steady hum of machines that kept fragile lives tethered to tomorrow. Ethan Hale walked that world like a man suspended between past and present, his polished shoes muted against the waxed floor. He had stayed late after the boardroom battle, unable to return to his empty penthouse. Something kept him here, in this wing of small voices and fragile hearts. Inside her room, Lila lay curled under thin blankets, her chest rising unevenly with each shallow breath. The oxygen tubing hissed softly. She looked impossibly small, her hair splayed across the pillow like a halo gone dim. When she noticed him at the doorway, she managed a faint smile. "You came back again," she whispered, voice raspy. Ethan stepped inside, drawing the chair closer. "Of course I did." She studied him with eyes too wise for her years. "They said tomorrow might be the surgery." His chest tightened. "Yes, Dr. Sanders thinks we can't wait much longer." Lila's lip trembled, her bravado finally faltering. What if I don't wake up?" The question came out so quietly it nearly broke him. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He had faced investors worth billions, litigations that stretched across continents, but this question, asked by an 8-year-old with paper bracelets, stripped him bare. He forced himself to meet her gaze. "Lila," he swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something." She nodded, waiting. He drew a deep breath, the words scraping against wounds he had buried for years. "I once had a daughter. Her name was Claire. She was about your age. She loved snowstorms more than anything. She'd beg me to take her outside no matter how cold. One winter night, we drove through the mountains. The storm was worse than we expected. The car..." His voice cracked. He pressed a hand against his forehead. "We didn't make it. She didn't make it. I did, and I've carried that night with me ever since." Silence stretched, heavy with grief. The machines continued their steady beeping, indifferent witnesses to confession. Lila's small hand, trembling but determined, reached for his. Her fingers were icy against his skin, yet the gesture was warmer than anything he had felt in years. "So that's why you're always so sad," she murmured. He closed his eyes, the sting of tears burning behind them. "I tried to bury it, to hide behind work, money, numbers, but none of it filled the silence she left." His voice faltered. "When I saw you in the snow that day, I thought maybe I was being given a second chance. Not to replace her, but to keep another child from slipping away." Lila squeezed his hand weakly. "Then promise me something." Ethan leaned closer, his heart pounding. "Anything." She took a shaky breath. "Promise me. If I wake up after the surgery, we'll go to a real park. Not the rooftop one. A big park, with swings and trees and snow that falls on our faces. Promise me we'll see it together." His throat closed. He had sworn never to make promises he couldn't keep. But looking at her now, pale yet fierce, He realized this was no ordinary vow. It was a lifeline, a beacon in the storm. He clasped her tiny hand between both of his voice breaking. "I promise, Lila. If you wake up, we'll go. I'll take you anywhere you want. We'll watch the snow fall together." Her lips curved into a faint, fragile smile. "Then I'm not scared anymore." She closed her eyes, holding onto his hand as though it tethered her to hope. Ethan sat there long after her breathing steadied, staring at the frail rise and fall of her chest. His mind replayed that night years ago, the blizzard, the headlights swallowed by white, the scream that still echoed in his dreams. He had sworn never to allow himself to feel again. But here he was, broken open by a girl who measured her life not in years, but in promises. For the first time since Claire's death, tears slid silently down his face. He did not wipe them away. He let them fall, each one dissolving the ice he had carried for too long. When Dr. Sanders entered later to check on Lila, she paused, surprised to see the billionaire CEO slumped in a hospital chair, head bowed, hand still entwined with his patient's. She said nothing, only adjusted the IV quietly, leaving him with his vigil. In the solitude of that room, Ethan Hale made another vow, unspoken but fierce. He would not lose Lila, not to bureaucracy, not to hesitation, not to fate. If it cost him every cent, every title, every ounce of pride, he would fight until the promise was kept. The night deepened, snow still falling softly outside the window. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt not just grief, but purpose. Morning broke pale and merciless over Burlington. The hospital lights seemed harsher than usual, fluorescent beams cutting through the pre-dawn quiet. Outside, snow drifted silently against the glass, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Ethan Hale sat in a sterile gown and cap, hands clasped together in a way that looked like prayer, though he hadn't prayed in years. He wasn't allowed inside the operating room, only to wait in the hallway beyond its sealed double doors. Still, he felt as though his entire soul were tethered to the sterile theater on the other side. Inside, Dr. Emily Sanders prepared her team. The heart patch, the bioengineered scaffold infused with vascular cells, sat ready in a sterile tray, cooled and preserved until the moment of graft. It was experimental, controversial, and in many eyes reckless. But for Lila, it was hope. The anesthesiologist adjusted the mask over her small face. "Deep breaths, sweetheart," he murmured. Lila's eyelids fluttered. She had clutched Ethan's hand until the very last moment, whispering, "Don't forget your promise." Now her body lay still under the surgical drapes, fragile frame dwarfed by machines. "Cardiopulmonary bypass ready?" Emily asked sharply. "Bypass primed, flow stable," the perfusionist confirmed. "All right," Emily said, her voice steady though her jaw was tight. "Let's begin." In the hallway, Ethan paced like a caged lion. Every sound from beyond the doors, clattering instruments, muffled instructions, pierced him like glass. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from the board, investors, press. He silenced it all. Nothing mattered except the fight being waged on the other side. He pressed his forehead against the cold wall, memories ambushing him. Another hospital, years ago. Another sterile corridor. A doctor delivering words that shattered him. "We did everything we could." This time would be different. It had to be. Inside the OR, Emily made the first incision, her gloved hands precise. "Initiating sternotomy," she called out. The saw whirred, opening the chest to reveal the fragile organ that had betrayed its owner. "On bypass," the perfusionist confirmed as the machine took over the functions of Lila's heart and lungs. Her blood flowed through tubing to the heart-lung machine. oxygenated and returned to her body. The monitor showed a flat, controlled rhythm. Emily's voice was calm, clinical. Exposing left ventricle. Prepare patch placement. For long minutes, the team worked in coordinated silence. The bioengineered patch was positioned carefully over the damaged myocardial wall, sutures anchoring it like a fragile lifeline. Then, as if on cue from fate, the alarm shrieked. Fib! The anesthesiologist barked. Ventricular fibrillation! The monitor exploded into chaos, wild, erratic spikes that signaled the heart was quivering, not pumping. Charge to 20 joules, Emily ordered, her voice steel. Clear! The paddles jolted Lila's chest. Her small body arched against the table. Still V-fib. Charge to 30, clear. Again, the shock. The monitor screamed, then faltered, then flatline. Asystole, a nurse whispered, the word heavy as stone. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Out in the hallway, Ethan felt it. Though no one had told him yet, he knew. He staggered against the wall, breath ragged, vision tunneling. The memory of Claire's last silence rushed back, threatening to drown him. Not again. God, not again. Inside the OR, Emily's voice cut through the panic. We are not losing her. Epinephrine, 1 milligram. Begin compressions. Tiny hands pressed beneath the sterile drapes, forcing life back into a chest that should never have had to fight this hard. Resume pacing. Charge again. 40 joules. Clear! Another shock. The monitor flickered. A pause. Then, a single blip. Then another. Sinus rhythm returning, the anesthesiologist breathed. We have a pulse. Relief swept the room like air after suffocation. Emily exhaled slowly, her hands steadying as she reinforced the graft. Let's close, carefully. Minutes later, the doors opened. Ethan leapt to his feet, his face pale, eyes searching. Dr. Sanders stepped out, her surgical cap damp with sweat, exhaustion written in every line of her face. For a moment, she said nothing, only pulled off her mask. She made it, she said finally, voice hoarse but sure. The patch is in place. Her rhythm stabilized. She's not out of danger, but she's alive. Ethan staggered, gripping the wall for support as a sob broke free, raw and unguarded. He had promised her, and she had kept fighting. When he could breathe again, he whispered, "Thank you." Dr. Sanders placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "Don't thank me. Thank her. That girl fought like no one I've ever seen." Ethan closed his eyes, the tears unstoppable. For the first time since the blizzard years ago, he wept not for what he had lost, but for what might still be saved. Later, when he was finally allowed to see her in recovery, he sat by her bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. Tubes still tethered her, machines still guarded every breath. But the paper bracelet remained on his wrist, intact through gown, gloves, and despair. He leaned close, whispering as though she could hear him even in her sedation. "You kept your side of the promise. Now it's my turn." Outside the recovery room, snow still fell over Burlington, silent and endless. But inside, for the first time in years, Ethan Hale felt the storm begin to break. The recovery wing smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweeter, warm blankets fresh from hospital dryers. The snow outside had eased into a quiet drizzle of white flakes, drifting against the tall windows like feathers shaken loose from the sky. Ethan Hale had not left his chair beside Lila's bed since the surgery. For 2 days, he remained in the same posture, shoulders bent, eyes fixed on the monitors that traced her fragile rhythm. The paper bracelet on his wrist had grown soft and wrinkled, but he refused to take it off. At last, on the morning of the 3rd day, Her eyelids fluttered. The smallest sound, a hoarse whisper, escaped her lips. "Ethan?" He bolted upright, heart hammering. "Lila?" Her eyes, pale but alive, blinked open. The oxygen cannula hugged her cheeks, wires and tubes still tethered her small frame, but her gaze was clear. She searched his face, then smiled faintly. "You kept your promise. I woke up." Ethan's throat closed. For a moment, he could only nod, gripping her hand as though it were the last rope holding him to shore. "You scared us," he whispered, voice rough with relief. "I scare people a lot," she croaked, trying to laugh but wincing at the soreness in her chest. "Don't joke," he chided softly, though his lips curved in spite of himself. She studied him quietly, then whispered, "Now it's my turn. I promised I'd try to live, and I'm still here." Tears blurred his vision. He pressed his forehead gently against her hand. "Yes, you are. And I'll make sure you stay." The days that followed were slow, measured by the soft beeps of machines and the steady discipline of recovery. Nurses checked vitals, adjusted drips, charted every fluctuation. Dr. Emily Sanders visited often, her expression equal parts cautious optimism and clinical vigilance. "The patch is holding," she explained to Ethan one evening, pointing to the echo on her tablet. "We're watching closely for rejection or complications, but so far, her body seems to be adapting." Ethan stared at the black and white image of the tiny heart beating inside Lila's chest. Each thump felt like a miracle written in motion. "So she's safe?" Emily's gaze softened. "Not safe, but safer than she's been in years." When she left, Ethan returned to his post by the window, where he read aloud from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web he'd bought from the hospital gift shop. His voice, once used for commanding boardrooms, now carried softly through the sterile air. Lila, propped against her pillows, listened with half-closed eyes. "Charlotte was brave," she whispered once. "She was," Ethan agreed. "She knew her time was short, but she still made it count." He faltered, throat tight. "And so will you." Snow continued to fall outside, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. Each night Ethan stayed, refusing to return to his penthouse. He slept in the chair, blanket draped over his shoulders, startled awake whenever the monitor beeped irregularly. One midnight he found Lila watching him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "Why do you stay?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because the thought of leaving and you not being here when I come back, I couldn't bear it." Her small hand reached for his. "Then don't leave." So he didn't. Recovery was not linear. Some mornings she managed to smile, even teased him into another round of tic-tac-toe. Other mornings she lay weak and gray, her oxygen saturations dipping, alarms chiming until nurses rushed in. Each episode threatened to unravel him, but he stayed anchored by her resilience. One afternoon, as sunlight pierced the clouds, Lila asked for the window blinds to be opened. Snow sparkled outside, reflecting golden light across the room. "Read again," she requested. He picked up the book, voice steady despite the lump in his throat. When he glanced over, she was not watching the page, but watching him. "You look different," she said softly. "How so?" "Your eyes, they're not frozen anymore." The words undid him. He reached for her hand, unable to speak. She squeezed weakly, smiling. Days turned to a week. Slowly, Lila's strength returned. Physical therapists came with gentle exercises, guiding her to sit, then stand with help. Her steps were small, trembling, but each one drew cheers from the nurses who had grown attached to her courage. Ethan watched every milestone as though it were a personal victory. When she took 3 steps unaided, his eyes filled with tears. When she managed 5, he almost laughed aloud. "You see?" she said, catching her breath, eyes shining. "I'm still winning games." "Yes," he whispered, overcome. "You are." One evening, while snow fell softly outside, Ethan sat at the window with Lila resting against her pillows. He was reading when she interrupted him. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "Are you still afraid to lose?" He closed the book slowly, meeting her gaze. "Less than before." She smiled faintly. "Good. Because sometimes it's not about winning or losing. It's about playing together." The simplicity of her truth pierced him. He leaned forward, pressing her small hand gently to his chest, where his own heart beat steady and strong. "Then we'll keep playing, as long as it takes." That night, as snow blanketed Burlington in white, Ethan realized something had shifted irrevocably. For years, he had been a man hollowed by loss, living only in shadows of memory. Now, beside this fragile child who refused to surrender, he felt something he thought he had buried forever: hope. The ice had begun to retreat from the edges of Central Park, its ponds thawing into rippling mirrors beneath the spring sun. Patches of snow lingered stubbornly under the oaks, but the air carried the scent of earth waking again. After months in the fluorescent corridors of UVM Medical Center, the park felt like another world, alive, sprawling, untamed. Ethan Hale pushed the wheelchair slowly along the paved path. He had insisted on coming himself, refusing any chauffeur, refusing even his assistant's anxious protests. This moment belonged only to them. Lila sat bundled in a pale blue coat, her legs still weak from weeks of recovery. But her face was radiant. She leaned forward, eyes darting everywhere, as if trying to absorb the entire park at once. The joggers, the dogs tugging leashes, the kites bobbing against the sky. "Ethan," she whispered breathlessly, "it's real." He smiled, his chest aching. "Yes, it's real." The swing sets stood ahead, gleaming in the afternoon light. For a moment, Ethan felt the past rise like a shadow. Another swing set, another child. Claire's laughter had once filled his ears here, years ago, before the snowstorm took everything. He had not set foot in Central Park since. Now, walking toward it with Lila, he felt that shadow begin to dissolve. With help from a therapist who had accompanied them, Lila stood carefully, her small hands gripping the metal chains. She moved slowly, awkwardly, but when she sat on the swing, her face lit up. "Push me," she demanded, her voice already breathless with excitement. Ethan chuckled. "Doctor's orders said light activity." "Light activity includes swinging," she argued. So he placed his hands gently against her back and pushed. The swing moved in small arcs at first, then wider, until her laughter burst out across the playground. Other children glanced over curiously, then smiled when they saw her joy. Snowflakes, late, fragile remnants of winter, fell from a sky that couldn't decide whether to hold on or to let go. Lila lifted her face, catching them on her cheeks. "See?" she shouted between giggles. "We're doing it! We're seeing snow together!" Ethan's throat tightened. He blinked hard, but the tears spilled anyway. "Yes, Lila, we are." Later they walked, or rather Lila walked a few steps, then rested, then tried again, along the winding paths. Each step was clumsy but determined. Ethan hovered protectively, ready to catch her at any stumble. At a bench overlooking the pond, she sat down, pulling something from her pocket. A bracelet, worn, folded paper, edges yellowing. "This is the last one," she said quietly. He frowned. "You've made dozens." "Not like this. This was the first one I ever folded. I kept it to remind myself that even paper can become strong if you fold it enough times. And now," she slipped it into his hand, "now it belongs to you." Ethan stared at the fragile loop. It weighed nothing, yet his fingers trembled. "You've already given me one," he murmured. "That was a promise," she corrected. "This one is proof." "Proof of what?" His voice cracked. "That you bought a smile," she said simply. "And not just mine, yours too." He couldn't stop it. Tears spilled freely down his face. He sank to the bench beside her, pressing the bracelet to his chest. "Lila, you've given me more than I ever gave you." She leaned against him, her head resting on his arm. "That's how promises work. They grow." As the sun dipped, painting the park in hues of gold and rose, they lingered near the Bethesda fountain. Street musicians played a soft violin melody that floated over the plaza. Children ran through puddles of melting snow. Parents called after them. Laughter echoed off the stone. For Ethan, every sound, every sight felt sharpened, as if life itself had returned to color after years in grayscale. He watched Lila tilt her head back, arms outstretched, spinning slowly to catch the last flakes drifting down. In that moment, she was not a patient, not a diagnosis, not a statistic. She was a child, alive, free, radiant in the simple miracle of being. He felt his knees weaken. He pressed his hand over his mouth to stifle a sob, but it escaped anyway. For the first time in decades, he cried openly in the middle of Central Park, not for loss, but for fulfillment, because the promise had been kept. When evening came, they returned to the car, exhaustion painting Lila's cheeks pale again. Yet her eyes never dimmed. She clutched his hand, the paper bracelet safely circling his wrist. "Ethan?" she whispered as she leaned against his shoulder. "Yes, Lila." Today was the best day. He closed his eyes, swallowing the ache in his throat. "Mine too." As the city lights flickered on and the last of the snow melted into the darkening paths, Ethan Hale realized that he had finally stepped out of the blizzard that had haunted him for years. The storm was behind him. Ahead was something new, fragile, imperfect, but real, a life worth living, together. The first snow of December arrived early that year in New York, soft and hesitant, as though the sky remembered Vermont and chose to follow Ethan Hale and Lila south. Central Park glittered under white lace, and on the edge of Fifth Avenue, cameras flashed, voices buzzed, and a crowd gathered for something the city had never seen before: the launch of the Lila Foundation. A wide banner stretched across the temporary stage: "For every child who deserves another tomorrow." Ethan stood at the podium in a dark wool coat, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes unguarded for once. At his side, small but radiant, stood Lila, cheeks flushed in the cold, a woolen hat pulled over her curls, and the same fragile paper bracelet circling her wrist. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice carrying across the plaza, "I built an empire once on numbers, patents, and profit. But none of it gave me peace. It wasn't until I met a little girl on the steps of a hospital in Burlington that I remembered what true value is." He glanced down at Lila, who squeezed his hand and nodded. His throat tightened, but he pressed on. "Today we dedicate this foundation, not in my name, but in hers. The Lila Foundation will provide advanced cardiac surgeries for children whose families cannot afford them, because no child should fight for a heartbeat alone." Applause rippled, but Ethan barely heard it. His eyes were on Lila, her smile bright despite the cold. Dr. Emily Sanders stepped forward next, representing the medical board. Her speech was precise, professional, but her voice caught when she looked at Lila. This is why we fight bureaucracy, why we chase science forward. Not for charts or trials, but for children who deserve to grow. When the ribbon-cutting moment came, the oversized ceremonial scissors were placed in Lila's hands. She struggled with the weight, and Ethan bent down, guiding her. Together they cut through the ribbon, red fabric snapping open like the past giving way to the future. The crowd cheered. Balloons, white and silver, were released into the frosty sky, drifting upward like promises carried on the wind. After the ceremony, Ethan and Lila slipped away from the reporters and donors, walking into the quiet of Central Park. Snowflakes spiraled around them, gentle and endless. Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Remember what I asked you that night? About the park?" He smiled, brushing snow from her hat. "Yes, and we're here again." She stopped beneath a tree where the branches sagged with snow. From her coat pocket, she pulled another bracelet, newly folded, the paper crisp and white. "This one's different," she said softly. "It's not for you. It's for the kids we haven't met yet, the ones who will need help." Ethan held it reverently. "Then we'll make sure they get it. Every single one." Her eyes glistened, reflecting the glow of the park's holiday lights. "Light isn't lost in the snow," she whispered. "It's passed on, one promise at a time." He froze, the words piercing him like music. She had said them with such certainty, such faith, that he felt the storm of his grief finally settle into silence. Kneeling in the snow, he placed the bracelet over her small wrist, tightening the loop gently. "You've taught me more than I ever thought possible, Lila. You've given me back the world." She smiled, leaning against him, her breath warm in the cold air. Later that evening, families of children awaiting surgery gathered under a tent near the fountain. Some were in wheelchairs, some with oxygen tanks, some bundled in coats far too thin for winter. Lila moved among them like a spark of light, showing her own scar proudly, handing out paper bracelets she had folded herself. One boy, no older than 5, clutched her hand. "Does it hurt?" he asked timidly. "Yes," she said honestly. "But then it gets better. And you'll have people who don't let go." The boy smiled, comforted not by statistics or medicine, but by her certainty. Ethan watched, his chest swelling with pride and wonder. This was no longer about his redemption alone. It was about hers, about theirs, about every child whose laughter had been muted by machines. As night deepened, Ethan and Lila stood together at the edge of the park. The city lights flickered beyond the trees, but here, under the snowfall, the world felt small, intimate, eternal. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the drifting balloons still visible in the distance. "Yes, because now even if I get scared again, I know the promise will keep going, even without me." His throat closed, but he whispered fiercely, "With you. Always with you." And in that moment, Ethan Hale, once a man defined by loss, felt whole. The blizzard of his past had melted, leaving behind not emptiness, but fertile ground for something new, something tender and enduring. Hope. From a snowy hospital gate in Vermont to the bright lights of Central Park, we've walked alongside Ethan and Lila through loss, hope, and the power of a single promise. Their story reminds us that light is never lost. It's passed on. One heart to another. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If stories of healing and second chances touch your heart, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter we share together.